On a bright spring afternoon in Chicago, Emily Carter stood at the center of what many considered a fairy tale. At just 26, she had married Daniel Harris, a handsome 28-year-old real estate agent who seemed to have everything together: success, charm, and a smile that could win anyone over. Their ceremony was held at a historic chapel downtown, its stained glass windows casting warm colors over the bride and groom as they exchanged vows. Guests whispered about how beautiful Emily looked, her lace gown glowing in the soft light, and how proud Daniel appeared as he slid the ring onto her finger. The reception was even grander. Friends toasted with champagne as the couple danced under a canopy of twinkling lights on a rooftop overlooking the city skyline. Emily's parents wept tears of joy, convinced their daughter had found the love of her life. Photographers captured every moment: the cutting of the cake, the shared laughter, the kiss that seemed to seal their perfect beginning. To everyone watching, it looked like a union built on trust, passion, and a shared future. But the perfection was only a carefully painted surface. What no one knew was that Daniel had been carrying a secret long before the wedding day arrived. In private, he had been entangled with a woman named Vanessa Torres, a 23-year-old aspiring influencer who had become accustomed to Daniel's attention and promises. Their relationship wasn't a passing fling. It was a hidden storm brewing just beneath the surface of Emily and Daniel's picture-perfect romance. Daniel told himself he would end things with Vanessa once the wedding was over. But when the big day came and went, he couldn't resist her. He messaged her from the bathroom during the reception, slipping away between speeches just to check in. He reassured her that nothing had changed, that she was still special. Vanessa, young and flattered by his affection, believed him. Meanwhile, Emily felt nothing but gratitude. She had grown up dreaming of a stable marriage, something her own parents never had. With Daniel, she thought she had finally escaped the chaos of her childhood. He was attentive in public, a man who pulled out her chair, held her hand, and spoke proudly of her achievements to friends and family. She believed his love was real, and that belief made her blind to the cracks already forming beneath the surface. As the wedding night came to an end, Emily looked at her husband and thought the best years of her life were just beginning. She imagined a future filled with children, a home of their own, and years of laughter ahead. Daniel, however, was already divided between two worlds: his public life with Emily and his secret life with Vanessa. For him, the wedding was a stage performance, a way to keep up appearances. For Emily, it was everything she had ever wanted. The city celebrated their union that night, unaware that within days, the perfect marriage would collapse into betrayal, heartbreak, and blood. It was the kind of secret that couldn't stay buried for long, and the fairy tale that started so beautifully would soon become one of Chicago's darkest tragedies. The first week of marriage should have been filled with excitement, but for Emily Carter, unease began to creep in almost immediately. At first, she brushed it off, telling herself that it was only the stress of adjusting to a new routine. Daniel was busy, she reasoned. His career in real estate often demanded long hours, late calls, and sudden showings. But soon the explanations didn't add up. His phone buzzed well past midnight, and the screen lit up with messages he quickly silenced. When she asked about it, he casually waved it off as work emergencies, though his tone carried an edge of irritation she hadn't heard before. Emily wanted to trust him. After all, it had only been days since they exchanged vows and promised forever. She reminded herself of the smiles at their wedding, of the way he had held her hand in front of their families, and of the dreams they had talked about for the future. Yet the pit in her stomach grew deeper with every unanswered question. Daniel seemed distracted, always glancing at his phone, always stepping outside for private calls. His kisses were shorter, his words clipped, his gaze distant. It was on the third day of their honeymoon phase, if it could even be called that, when Emily's suspicions sharpened. She noticed Daniel changing his passcode. They had shared everything during their engagement, and his sudden need for secrecy alarmed her. He started leaving his phone face down on the nightstand and keeping his laptop closed whenever she entered the room. These small details piled up, each one gnawing at her trust. One afternoon, while Daniel claimed he had to meet a client, Emily stayed home, restless and uneasy. She couldn't shake the sense that something wasn't right. Her eyes drifted to his laptop, carelessly left on the couch. She hesitated at first, afraid of what she might find, but her curiosity overpowered her. The moment she opened it, her fears became reality. There, buried in the email drafts and message logs, she found exchanges that shattered her world. Romantic notes from Vanessa Torres. The woman Daniel had sworn was just a friend from before their marriage. The messages were recent, not remnants of an old fling. He had told Vanessa how much he missed her, how he couldn't wait to see her again. He wrote about how his new marriage was just a cover, how he still belonged to her. Emily's hands trembled as she scrolled through them, her chest tight with disbelief and rage. The betrayal was so fresh, so cutting, that she had to close the laptop before she broke it in half. Her mind spun. Just a week ago, she had walked down the aisle believing in forever. Now her husband's words mocked her, exposing the lie her marriage had become before it even had the chance to grow. She sat in silence, staring at the ring on her finger, the very symbol of their vows, now feeling like nothing more than a cruel trick. From that moment, Emily's perception of Daniel shifted. She no longer saw the man she had promised her life to. Instead, she saw someone who had deceived her, who had used her, who had made a fool of her in front of everyone she loved. The hurt burned so deeply it began to fester into something darker. What Emily didn't yet realize was that this discovery wasn't the end of her nightmare, it was only the beginning. Emily's discovery of the affair didn't fade with time, it grew sharper with each passing hour. She couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, and couldn't look at Daniel without seeing the messages burned into her mind. Every excuse he gave for leaving the house felt like another insult, another reminder that she had been tricked into marrying a man who had never truly been hers. Instead of confronting him immediately, Emily decided to observe. She began tracking his routines, studying his habits with a cold, quiet focus. The man she once adored had become a stranger, and she needed to know exactly how deep his betrayal went. It didn't take long for her patience to pay off. She noticed Daniel growing more careful, showering after late-night outings, deleting texts, even leaving home in different clothes than the ones he returned in. But lies always leave cracks, and Emily soon pieced together his pattern. Through a combination of overheard phone calls and a receipt carelessly left in his pocket, she learned he had rented an Airbnb in a quiet suburb just outside Chicago. The booking wasn't for business, as he claimed. It was a hideaway, a private retreat for him and Vanessa. The reality of it hit Emily like a physical blow. Her husband, barely a week into their marriage, had created a secret world with another woman. The betrayal wasn't just emotional, it was humiliating. He hadn't even tried to hide it well. To Emily, this was proof that Daniel didn't fear losing her, that he thought she would remain loyal and blind while he lived a double life. That arrogance filled her with rage, but Emily was not the naive bride he believed her to be. The humiliation hardened into resolve. If Daniel could so carelessly play with her life, she would show him that she was not someone to discard. The idea of revenge was no longer a fleeting thought. It became a plan, something she nurtured in silence as Daniel carried on with his lies. She began preparing in subtle ways, slipping items into her bag that could easily be explained if questioned. Gloves bought under the guise of cleaning, duct tape tucked away as part of household supplies, and a sharp kitchen knife she claimed she wanted sharpened at a shop. To Emily, these weren't tools of impulse but instruments of justice. The night Daniel arranged to meet Vanessa at the Airbnb, Emily followed without hesitation. She kept her distance, trailing his car through the dim streets until he pulled up to the rental house. From her own car, parked a block away, she watched him greet Vanessa with an embrace, their laughter cutting through the night air. The sight was unbearable. She clenched the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles turned white. Every image of their wedding, every smile captured in photographs, clashed with this moment of raw betrayal. Emily sat in silence for nearly an hour, her mind racing between heartbreak and fury. She thought of confronting them immediately, bursting through the door to demand answers, but the idea of mere words felt empty. Words couldn't erase the humiliation, the lies, the destruction of everything she had built in her heart. She wanted more. She wanted them to feel the same pain she felt every time she looked at her ring, every time she remembered the vows spoken under the eyes of family and friends. As the lights inside dimmed, Emily knew the moment was approaching. Her decision had already been made long before she parked on that street. Tonight would not end with questions or confessions. Tonight would end with blood. The suburban night was quiet, the kind of silence that amplifies every movement. Emily stepped out of her car, her bag slung across her shoulder, the weight of its contents pressing against her side like a reminder of what she had come to do. The house stood in front of her, ordinary and unassuming, with its blinds drawn and a faint glow spilling from the upstairs window. She moved quickly, her footsteps muffled by the soft grass as she slipped into the backyard. The sliding door had been left unlocked, an oversight born of comfort and carelessness, and with a gentle push she was inside. The air smelled faintly of perfume and candle wax. On the kitchen counter sat 2 wine glasses, half empty, evidence of the intimacy she had long suspected. Every detail in the house screamed betrayal, the laughter that lingered in the air, the discarded clothes trailing up the stairs, the faint sound of music playing in the background. Emily's pulse quickened as she tightened the gloves on her hands, her heart thundering not with fear, but with a grim sense of purpose. She crept silently, each step deliberate as she ascended the staircase. At the top, she paused, staring down the hall toward the bedroom. The door was partially open, and through the gap she could see shadows moving. The sound of whispered laughter carried to her ears, shattering whatever fragments of hesitation remained. She pushed the door open with slow precision, her eyes adjusting to the dim light. Daniel and Vanessa lay tangled together on the bed, their faces relaxed and unguarded. The scene was everything Emily had imagined, and seeing it with her own eyes set her rage ablaze. She moved swiftly, pulling the knife from her bag in one smooth motion. In the next instant, she lunged. The blade came down with brutal force, plunging into Daniel before he had a chance to react. His eyes shot open, wide with shock, but the scream caught in his throat. He tried to push her away, his hands fumbling against her arms, but the strikes kept coming, each one driven by the months of lies and humiliation she had carried. Vanessa's scream erupted, piercing and frantic, shattering the silence of the house. Emily turned her fury toward her, her movements sharp and relentless. Vanessa tried to scramble off the bed, clawing at the sheets in desperation, but Emily's grip was unyielding. The struggle was chaotic, violent, and filled with the raw energy of desperation on one side and unrelenting rage on the other. Within minutes, the room was drowned in silence once more, broken only by Emily's heavy breathing. She stood in the wreckage, the knife slick in her hands, staring at what she had done. Daniel's body lay slumped across the bed, his once confident face now lifeless. Vanessa's wide eyes were frozen in terror, her hand still outstretched as if begging for mercy that never came. The room smelled of iron and fear, a brutal contrast to the soft candles still flickering on the nightstand. For a long moment, Emily didn't move. She was trapped in the haze of her actions, her mind struggling to catch up with the violence her hands had carried out. Eventually, she forced herself into motion. She dragged their bodies toward the bathroom, leaving faint streaks across the floor, her movements mechanical, as though she were completing a task rather than committing a crime. She washed her hands in the sink, watching the water swirl pink before it disappeared down the drain. When she finally left the house, the night was still calm, as if nothing had happened. She locked the back door behind her, walked to her car, and drove away. To anyone passing by, she would have seemed like just another woman heading home after a late evening. But inside, Emily knew she had crossed a line from which there was no return. The fairy tale had ended, and in its place stood a nightmare she had created with her own hands. By morning, the quiet of the suburban street had begun to stir. Neighbors noticed Daniel's car parked outside the Airbnb long after sunrise, its windows fogged, its presence unusual for a weekday morning. The house remained still, blinds drawn, no sign of movement inside. Some assumed the couple inside were sleeping late. Others, unsettled by the silence, took note but went on with their day. Hours passed, and the vehicle remained unmoved. When evening arrived and the same scene remained unchanged, suspicion grew strong enough for someone to call the property owner, who in turn contacted police. When officers forced their way into the rental, they were met with a scene more chilling than they could have imagined. The smell hit first, metallic and heavy, followed by the sight of 2 lifeless bodies crumpled in the bathroom. Blood marked the path between the bedroom and the tiled floor, a stark record of violence. Daniel Harris, the charming young real estate agent, lay lifeless beside Vanessa Torres, the aspiring model who had unknowingly become part of a deadly love triangle. Both bore the unmistakable signs of a vicious attack. Detectives combed the scene with meticulous care. The knife, still smeared with blood, had been left in the sink. The wine glasses in the kitchen remained untouched from the night before. Security cameras mounted on a neighboring house revealed a blurry but telling image, a car that matched Emily Carter's parked on the street late that night. Even more damning, her fingerprints were found on the weapon. There was no sign of forced entry, suggesting the attacker had walked in through an unlocked door. The pieces quickly began to form a clear picture. Back in Chicago, Emily tried to resume her life as if nothing had happened. She returned to her job, answered calls from family, and carried on with the mask of a newlywed bride. She even left framed wedding photos on display in her apartment, as though clinging to the illusion of the life she once wanted. But beneath the surface, she was restless, paranoid, and unable to escape the images of that night. She had convinced herself that she had delivered justice, yet the weight of her actions followed her like a shadow. The illusion unraveled within days. Detectives arrived at her apartment with a warrant, and Emily's world collapsed under the weight of the evidence. They found her wedding dress still hanging in the closet, untouched since the night she wore it, and in her bag the gloves and duct tape she had carried to the crime scene. Her arrest shocked everyone who knew her. Friends described her as kind, quiet, and devoted to Daniel. No one could reconcile the smiling bride from the wedding photos with the woman now accused of double homicide. During her trial, prosecutors painted a chilling portrait. They described Emily as a woman driven not just by heartbreak, but by cold, calculated rage. The jury listened to the evidence, the surveillance footage, the messages between Daniel and Vanessa, the forensic trail that tied Emily to the murders. Her defense attempted to argue temporary insanity, fueled by the shock of betrayal, but the brutality of the attack left little room for sympathy. When the verdict was read, guilty on 2 counts of murder, Emily stood motionless, her face expressionless, her wedding ring still glinting under the courtroom lights. The life she had dreamed of was gone, replaced by the walls of a prison cell. What had begun as a fairy tale wedding had unraveled into one of Chicago's most haunting tragedies. The bride who once promised love until death had, within a single week, fulfilled that vow in the darkest way imaginable.